Thanks for tuning in. I'm Ben Aston, and this is the Digital Project Manager podcast. So today I'm joined by Alexa Huston. Alexa, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
And today we are talking about making process changes and how we can make process improvements and make it all a bit more straightforward. But first, Alexa, let's find a little bit about you. Now, from your bio, I can read. So I know that you're working at an agency called Crema. Is that how you pronounce it?
It's pronounced Crema. It comes from the golden layer that rises to the top of an espresso shot. So if you're familiar with coffee or being a barista in the past, that might sound familiar. But a lot of people say Crema. It's actually Crema. And that's fine either way.
Well, thank you for putting me right. What I was actually quite interested when I was reading your bio. It seems like when you're not at the office, you're getting stronger. You're in the kitchen cooking up something delicious or going on some travels. We were just actually talking about some of your travels earlier, but this getting stronger thing, how's that working out for you?
It is a work in progress, but yeah, I joined an amazing gym at the end of last year and it's fun. I'm doing things I never thought I'd be doing, like Olympic lifting and Metcon training and things like that. So it's just been a part of my life the last year, a little bit more than in the past. It's been really fun.
It sounds very serious. Are you entering some competitions?
I don't think I will ever do that. People? No, merely to get stronger and be healthy, and something I do with my boyfriend just to make myself a little bit better every day.
Nice. Cool. So tell me a bit about you. How is it that you ended up becoming a digital project manager? I had a sneak creep on your LinkedIn, and I saw that your career. I'm going to say that's part of your career, but it started as a writing and time management tutor, which sounds like the perfect training for a project manager.
Yeah,
a time management tutor.
One could make the argument that actually was an accident as well. I had a great university that I went to with a learning center, and I had a work study program in that learning center, and they asked me to be a tutor in time management and writing. So I did that throughout college. Through some twists and turns after graduation, I was actually a traditional project manager at an advertising agency and really learned the 101 of PMing from a traditional marketing background. So I was there for a couple years before I took a little sabbatical to travel and live in Hawaii for a month. And when I announced me leaving, I had an old colleague reach out and say, "Hey, what's your plan when you get back?" And I said, I don't quite have one, but do you have something in mind? And he is our business development strategist at Crema, and said, "We're looking for another project manager to come on board. We build web apps and mobile apps." And I thought to myself, how different could that be? Turns out it's really different. I've learned a lot.
Yeah.
But I just kind of fell into it by accident. But it's been a great 2 years learning the ropes of a DPM life.
Cool. So before you, because I have a similar story in that, I started off in traditional ad agencies and then, made the switch to digital. But how was that switch for you in terms of, were you a kind of techie person before, or how did that work out for you?
That is a good question. I wasn't necessarily. I had touched a couple digital projects in the ad agency, but looking back, it barely was that. It was helping to manage some content creation on a website. And so I thought I had some familiarity with it. I've always grown up with technology, but I wouldn't consider myself a technologist. So all that is to say, there was quite a bit of a steep learning curve when I came on board and took on my first project almost immediately, where we were rebuilding a fintech product. And there's a whole host of things that I hadn't even considered, and that thankfully I had a great team to help lead me through that. But truly, I came in pretty green, not from a project management standpoint, but more from a DPM standpoint. And there's a lot to learn there, as I'm sure we all know.
Yeah, indeed. So yeah, tell me a bit about Crema then. So you, so it's web and mobile apps primarily?
That's right. Yeah, we primarily specialize in JavaScript-based web and mobile development. We're a big React shop, React Native, but we also do quite a bit of business strategy, prototyping, user testing, and validation of ideas, primarily serving two different personas. So one persona could be this funded entrepreneur who's been through the ropes a few times and has some money to experiment with this new idea. And so we'll bring them in and help to validate and test that product, which we hopefully would then build after validation. That's really fun. We also work with more established corporations who might have an innovation team or a product manager who's been tasked to innovate. And so they'll come to us and say, hey, I've got this budget and I need to make some stuff better. So here's what I'm thinking. Can we design this out? Can we test it? Other times we need to rebuild this now. And we say, that sounds great, but let's, dive in, get under the hood a little bit and understand the best way to do that.
Cool. Sounds fun. So you doing things like design sprints, like with, these kind of entrepreneurs who've got a load of cash and want to test an idea? Or what's your process for like validating?
Yeah, we do design sprints. We take a lot of learnings from the Google design sprint process, but we've kind of, customized those to fit our needs. So a lot of times we'll suggest a 4 to 6 week engagement where we'll meet with a client and do, day and a half, 2-day kickoff session to run through a lean model canvas, a story spinding exercises, and various other tactics to help unpack that idea and make sure that, one, there's a problem that people want to be solved, and two, that this is the right solution to solve that. And we might not know everything after those, 2 days, of course, but oftentimes a lot of is uncovered, and we'll say, all right, well, based on what we know, let's experiment with these different scenarios, and our designers and strategists will get to work kind of creating pretty high fidelity wireframes. In fact, we don't even really use that term. We just jump straight into design. There's a lot of great tools out there that help our designers just get started, and we're lucky to have an amazing staff. So they'll get to work on creating some views, some interactive prototypes, if you will, to get out and test. And sometimes we're testing with random people we find on Craigslist or recruited by the client, or, more internal stakeholders on various client teams that we know we need their input. So it is sort of a sprinting schedule where we design for, 5 days, and then we'll test for 2, and then iterate, test, and kind of finalize the approach. And ideally, if especially we're planning to go into development after that time, we'll have our developers in on that process to help be consulting along the way and making some informed decisions. So by the end of it, we have a good idea, or a better idea at least, of what it's going to take to build.
Cool. Yeah, it sounds fun. I've done a few of the Google design sprints, and I think one of the things that sounds interesting about your process over the process, like the Google process, is that the typically in the Google design sprint, the client is has to be fully engaged for a full week, and so like they're there on site full time. They're kind of concepting with you and developing the initial prototypes. And the problem with that is that most clients can't afford to have their most important people out the office, on site doing a sprint for a week. It's not viable. And so then what we found was that clients were interested in doing our sprint, design sprint, but then it took 3 months, 4 months to schedule. And then it's this isn't really working. So it sounds like having that reduced just the unpacking phase, and then going straight into design concepting, and just taking it, rather than keeping them engaged right the way through the first sprint, just getting them involved in the beginning bit sounds...
Yeah, and that's so true. I mean, we know people are busy, and they're also paying a lot of money to test this idea. And so we find that reducing down the involvement to, 1 to 2 days, and then let us get running. But we also bring our clients into our project management system. So while they might not be physically in the room, we're updating them almost asynchronously, constantly, by use of Asana or Zen Hub or other tools that we use in-house. So they still are very much involved in the process, just not physically committing their bodies in a room for 1 week. Because it'd be amazing if we could do that. It's just not realistic.
Yeah. No, yeah. And it is amazing when the clients do it. Like one of our clients, we did a design sprint, and the great thing was, because we did have the clients engaged throughout the whole week, we came up with we worked together on a concept that was so out there that it was actually for I can talk about it. So it was for BCLC, which is BC's Lottery Corporation, and they wanted a more fun way to help people pick their lottery numbers, because some people they think about playing the lottery and then they get to the kind of kiosk and are like, oh, I don't know what numbers to pick. So we wanted a way to enable it to be more fun to pick your numbers. And so the concept that we came up with was a puppy picker. And so you chose your numbers based on pictures of dogs, and each dog had a different number. You didn't know what number it was, but you just picked the dogs you liked, and then that chose numbers for you, which is the most crazy, stupid, really, idea. But somehow, because the client was engaged throughout the entire process, what you'd have thought would be like a client would never go for that, the client went for, and now it's live. You can use this puppy picker to choose your lottery numbers.
That is amazing.
And it's crazy, right? When actually you get the clients involved, amazing things can happen, and some things that we'd often maybe just discount get carried through, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
Cool. So, are you working on any interesting projects at the moment that you can talk about?
Oh gosh, I'm working on so many projects right now. Without going into specifics, I can at least touch on the different industries, because they range from network security to online chat to dermatology to on-demand job hunting. And I think that's it, among a whole host of internal things. So
what's on-demand job hunting?
So this particular product helps to, and maybe on-demand wasn't the right word choice there, but this product helps high schoolers get connected to employers that are able to hire said age group. A lot of times there's this felt need, I've learned a lot about, where high schoolers will be driving around. Their typical like workflow to find a job during the summer or when they're available is like drive around to companies they want to work for and grab an application. And it's not until after they submit their application where they find out whether they're able to work for that company or not based on age rules. And so this app helps to vet as a two-sided marketplace those employers so that you're only matched with jobs that you qualify for based on your age.
So what kind of jobs, I'm pretty ignorant here, obviously. So what kind of jobs can't you get? Like you're working in a bar or something like that?
Sure. I mean, that's one, but even like some restaurants, you have to be 16 or older, but some employers also hire kids who are 14 and 15. Right. And so it helps to match them based on industries that they're interested in and some other variables that help them to be matched on those criteria and not run into the age issue along the way, because that can be a little disheartening. Yeah.
Cool. Sounds fun. Yeah. So let's talk about the article you wrote. And if you haven't checked it out yet, check it out. It's all about, as I said, managing process change and how to make process improvement easier. So if you're thinking, hold on, my process isn't working, or even if you're thinking, let's try doing Scrum in our agency, then check out this article first. It's well worth reading. But first, just for the uninitiated, let's talk about process for just a minute. I think process is one of those things that you always find project managers talking about. And making process change is something, again, that project managers love to talk about. So when we're talking about process, we're talking about it's the way that we do things. It's the status quo on the way things go. It's how we know whether or not people are following the rules. It's how we know whether or not things are happening properly or not. And so the reason why project managers are talking about this all the time is we're trying to establish the best way of doing things. We're trying to make it the most efficient. We're trying to streamline it. And so that's why project managers are always talking about this. We're trying to make the way that we do things better. And so process improvement should be happening all the time. We should be trying to change the way that we do things and improve them and make it better. But the way that we do that, I think, is really important. And that's what Alexa has written an article about. So there's a few things that you talk about, Alexa. You talk about being empathetic, about being strategic, realistic, dedicated, and patient. But let's kind of put it into the context of the story that you tell in the article, which is changing or trying to shift your agency to Scrum.
Right.
I'd love to know, like, how it came about that you thought this was a good idea, and how that worked out. Tell me about that.
Sure. Yeah. So we are a pretty small agency. There's less than 25 of us, and I think an important thing to note here is that we really value constant improvement, and so that's a shared value among the company to experiment with things and be better and try to make everyone's workflow improved. So that does complement, I think, where I come from as a person as well. And it's nice to know that that's just a value that our company shares. And so the idea here is that starting about 2 years ago, which is when I started, so prior to that coming on, the agency was structured more so as a waterfall organization, and that the clients we were working with and the projects we were having just kind of fell into that framework. And there's nothing wrong with it. In fact, even with like these design sprint and prototyping engagements I was talking about earlier, that is pretty waterfall in nature. However, when you start to get into development, things are far less predictable and much more variable, especially the longer the time can be. And so we slowly started to shift away from, fixed scope and waterfall-based projects into duration and price-based agreements, meaning when we work with a client, ideally, they're just paying for our team for a set amount of time. And that cost is a function of that duration. And within that time, the Agile framework really helps us to react to the needs of the client. And we might, know exactly where we want to start and have a good idea of where the endpoint is. But along the way, Agile methodologies allow us to change what happens. And so to make a long story short, we've been doing these duration and price agreements. We've been becoming more agile in nature. I have a great PM team. There's only 3 of us, but we're all very committed to this arrangement. And about 6 months ago, we said to ourselves, we should probably become Scrum certified, just from a professional development standpoint, to get more familiar with more brass tacks in terms of that process. We had been borrowing some of the things that Scrum teaches, but we wanted to just be a little bit more educated in that and ultimately be able to better explain processes to our team and to have a shared understanding outside of just our PM team, but from, the organization as a whole.
So in the do you play the role of a Scrum Master then? Is that the role of the project manager, or do you have one of the devs doing that?
That's a good question. We play the role of the Scrum Master. Okay.
Yeah, because I think it's really interesting. For most agencies, Scrum doesn't work, and it doesn't work because the engagement model is wrong. Because there's a fixed scope, and if you're just and so the engagement model that you're talking about in terms of, well, you just pay for a duration, like clearly that works. That aligns well with Scrum.
It does, although it can be a hard sell. Certainly, clients don't really
how does that work?
Clients don't always love to see a large figure not tied
with
specific deliverables. Yeah, no matter how we spin it. I mean, that would be hard, just putting myself in their shoes to be like, yeah, this seems right. But along the sales process and as we're working with them, we try to explain the benefits of that And, pointing to case studies and other examples helps to drive home that point. And of course, there's also been times where it hasn't worked for that client, and we'll make adjustments based on that. But that is the preferred approach. Let's just do a duration and price, and we'll be agile. And of course, it's easier said than done, but let's hop in.
Yeah. And so how often have you had it that clients have turned around and said, this isn't working. I'm not getting, we're 2 months in and we haven't got anything useful yet.
Sure. Yeah, that's hard. And that's actually where we wanted to stress the importance of the Scrum process, because it does coach you to, at the end of every sprint, have something shippable. Yeah. And so that shippable increment can help make the client feel better about progress, because we're marching toward a goal of something that is visible and, more or less physical. I mean, that you can interact with on your device, right? And so that shift to Scrum has helped maybe ease that tension with a client in the past, where previously they might have said it's been 2 or 3 weeks, where is anything? And in Scrum, while it hasn't been perfect, it does allow us to, I think, more realistically set sprint goals and say, by the end of this, we're going to have X. And that X, our client can see and touch and feel good about where we're at and provide feedback on.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. That makes sense. So one of the things that you're talking about, which I think is really important, is being empathetic. And so how did that play out with this example in terms of your changing the way you're engaging with clients, you're changing the way that you're working as a team. So how did you apply that kind of principle of being empathetic with with your team as you were trying to roll this out? Because, you talk about, people generally don't like change. Developers always want to do Scrum, but apart from that, how did you decided that you wanted to do Scrum. How did you bring people along for the ride with you? Trying to get people's input, but actually you already had a plan. The plan was Scrum.
Right. Yeah, that's the interesting point, right? It's like we're a little mischievous behind the scenes, but in all reality, we wanted to do it, and the team all knew that was happening. It wasn't like we were mysteriously gone for a 2-day period. And when we came back, we regrouped and decided to put together, this is just a real tactical thing in nature, but we put together a lunch and learn that kind of reiterated the points of Scrum and how Scrum works and why Scrum. And the idea was that would provide more context. A lot of our team had experiences with Scrum in the past, whether in previous jobs or whatnot, but this was, through the lens of Crema and how we wanted to implement it at our company. And at the end of that lunch and learn, we broke up into 3 separate groups led by each of us. And we said, okay, everyone, what questions do you have? Where might you feel concerned? Where do you feel good about this? And we took all that feedback and dropped it into a new process for ourselves in Asana, that we're basically just collecting process improvement suggestions from the team or things that we've come up with coming out of this whole shift into Scrum. And we're going to be scrubbing through that in the next couple of months, kind of identifying who's owning each initiative and how we want to go about improving the process. But the core idea, and to answer your question, was let's get certified, let's learn more about it, let's get it right, and then let's come back to our team, the people doing this work, and make sure that we're answering any questions that they have and putting ourselves in their shoes to make sure that there isn't any uneasiness about what is happening. And if there is, working to address that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really key. I think, getting people to buy, whenever you're making a process change, getting people to buy into it before, rather than making just a big announcement. Hey, so next week we're changing to Scrum.
Right.
Good luck, everyone. And I'm going on vacation.
Yeah, and that can be jarring and confusing. And so we wanted to limit that as much as possible. And there were also projects during that time, this was earlier this summer, where we just based on where we were at in the projects, we didn't try to infuse any big changes into that. We're like, let's just maintain the status quo on this one. But, on this particular project, we'll make sure that things are kind of falling into the new way, so to speak. So it wasn't, the idea wasn't to have everything change overnight. It was, let's get certified. Let's make this a progressive change that we'll make over time when things line up that way.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that you talk about in your article is being strategic, that there's a time and a place to change things. It's not necessarily just saying, hey, tomorrow everything changes and good luck. But also I think it's important having a process for the process change. So there's a plan. There's a plan not just to switch to Scrum, but there's a plan around and a process for, okay, how do we assess whether or not a project is suitable for applying the new process to, for the current projects because this is always a challenge when you're implementing a new process is, okay, well, what do we do with the existing things? And then if you just decide, oh, well, actually, all the existing things can stay as they are and we'll just apply it to new projects, what can be challenging is that actually you never get round to applying it on the new projects, because a new project comes in and then you're like, oh, let's just do it the old way. Yeah. we know how to do it that way. So I think there's a balance to be struck there for sure. Yeah,
that's a really good point. And it's not always easy to tell right away. You have to kind of trust your gut and definitely talk with the team and say, does this feel right? Is this the right time? Does this strategy make sense? Is this going to throw you off too much? In the article I mentioned, we decided to switch pretty rapidly to ZenHub, which is a project management skin for GitHub. And it's been awesome because it's so tied to the code and everything it's actually a beautiful tool to use. But we kind of shotgunned into that decision like a couple days before we were about to start development on this project that we had been prototyping and testing. And we all got into a room and talked about it. And I was like, guys, should we do this? I know it's going to be new and kind of weird. And truthfully, I don't even feel that confident about all the features right now. But I think if we don't do this now, we're going to miss the boat for the next 10 weeks. And based on that and some other reasons from the developers, we were like, well, this might hurt at first, but let's just jump in. And I let the client know we were going to do that because, again, we try to infuse them as much as we can into the project. And he said, sounds good. Just, let me know how I can help. And we're still using it to this day. But that was one of those situations where we were like, okay, let's go. Let's do this. This feels right. And if it doesn't work, going back to your earlier point, what is our plan? And we had that laid out and we were just ready to get started.
Yeah. And I think it's often like a Bandaid, isn't it? Like
it is.
You need to rip it off. And it's sometimes best to do it quickly. But you just need to keep remembering why you're doing it. Yeah. Because it will be painful and there will be things that go wrong. But you need to keep on reminding people, hey, guys, remember why we're doing this? It's so that we don't have to, triple enter all the data and all the tasks and our timesheets or whatever it might be.
And on that note, I was almost more scared than anybody because I was so used to the way we had been running projects in Asana. And Asana is great, but when you start to use it for development management, it can get pretty tricky. And we have, thanks to my colleague, really hacked a pretty brilliant system into that program. So it worked, but it was causing a lot of duplication of effort from the developers. So the idea to switch to this new tool was based on conversations we've had over the last couple of years on how we can make that process better for everybody. And so I would argue that it was almost more scary for me as the PM on that project than maybe a developer who was ready to use something that was more tied to their workflow.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think as the PM as well, as we're the ones who invariably have to pick up the pieces. If something goes wrong, it's on our heads. So yeah, it can be a bit scary. But I think another of the points that you make in the article is about being realistic. And just this point there, at the end of the day, project management is about helping people do their best work, not getting in the way. And I think that is so key that it's we're trying to make things better, but we shouldn't have an ego here. This isn't about, hey, I've come up with this really cool idea, let's do it, and then you try and hold your ground, even if it's a really bad idea. If it's not working or it needs changing, I think it's such sound advice to be like, okay, we need to be assessing this, working out whether or not it's working, and make improvements to the process rather than just sticking to our guns and thinking, hey, it's kind of my way or the highway.
Exactly. And that's what Scrum helps to solidify as well, because even before we were using the Scrum framework, we've always done retrospectives at the end of every sprint and then at the end of every project. And that is a really good way to get some feedback from a team, because the goal would be to get some actionable items out of that. Like, yeah, let's talk about what went well and what didn't go so hot, but let's also maybe come up with some solutions to those pain points and experiment with how those go. So in that way, the Scrum methodology really roots for that and helps to not only test and iterate on the product being developed, but I would also say test and iterate on the process along the way. So those retrospectives are key. And there's a lot of different ways. This sounds really naive, but I didn't know there was a lot of different ways you could approach a retrospective, obviously with different questions, but experimenting with those and trying to get answers from differently asked questions is a really key piece for us to make sure that we're still doing well. So one example, just tactically, of a retrospective we had recently, one of the team members was like, ZenHub's going great, but I'm not totally sure. It's hard for me to tell exactly what's in progress at one time. I know what I'm held accountable for in this sprint, but I feel like it might be helpful to know exactly which ticket I'm working on. And so we decided to put in not only a backlog, like a sprint backlog column, but also an in progress column. So there was a clear distinction of like, okay, here are all the things we're working on in this sprint, but here's this specific distinct item that this person is working on. And so just adding an additional column in ZenHub as a simple example was one of the things that has come out of a recent retrospective. Cool.
Yeah, I think it's great when we're able to like listen to our teams and make us, and the cost of adding in an additional column is nothing. But then when it gets people, enables people to feel heard and to feel like, actually, yeah, it matters. I came up with this idea. And
it's making us better.
Yeah.
Right.
Cool. So you've talked about ZenHub, which I've never actually played with. So are there any other tools that you found recently that's making your life awesome?
Oh man, we love tools at Crema. There's one of our founders just wrote a blog article that I think we use like 36 different SaaS products and tools to run our business.
That sounds expensive.
It can be. It can be. I mean, some of it's G Suite and things like that, but we definitely love our tools, and we audit those occasionally as well, just to make sure, is this really providing value? Is this still meeting our needs? Is there a better option or no option? But yeah, ZenHub's great. I've mentioned Asana. That's kind of our bread and butter tool that we've been using for a lot of years and total fanboys and fangirls of. And we still use those for some projects and internal communications and things like that. But, we just try to keep our eye out on what our team finds in the wild. We're all seem to be very inquisitive and curious about different tools and better tools. So I would say ZenHub is the most recent example of that, but we're always trying to keep our eyes peeled for something else that might work. And there's a lot of free trials, so we usually don't hesitate to sign up for those and experiment with them along the way.
Are you trialing anything at the moment that you're...
I'm trying to think. Currently, I'm not. I'm wondering if my other colleague is, but nothing's coming to mind at the moment. I'm sure there's something I'm missing.
So apart from Asana and ZenHub, what are the project management tools that you use? Like, how are you monitoring kind of burn on I guess if you're just managing projects on a duration basis, the costs, the forecasted costs and your actual costs are exactly the same, right?
Yeah, they should be. Yeah. We do use Harvest and Forecast to track those as well. Going back to ZenHub, to sing their praises one more time, they have awesome reporting. So we can see our burn down in every different sprint along the way, which is awesome. But Harvest and Forecast allow us to make sure that we're tracking on capacity and things of that nature. We've been using Dropbox Paper for note-taking, and that's been pretty slick, super collaborative. We really like that. And obviously Slack, because everyone is it's the best chat tool in America, in the world.
In America.
Yeah, here in America, it's the best. And so, yeah, just a variety of things. I love we have an employee engagement tool called 15-5. So every Friday I fill out this small short questionnaire that goes straight to my boss just to get feedback on how I'm doing. A little retrospective in nature, but that has sparked a lot of good conversations between me and my boss and the team in general, just of what's going well, what could be improved, and what we're looking forward to.
Cool. That sounds good. Cool. Well, thank you, Alexa, so much for joining us. It's been great having you with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time.
Cool. And if you'd like to contribute to this conversation, if you have been making some process changes and you've got some tips too, or you've been trying to switch to Scrum, why not join the conversation in our Slack team? Find it by going to the community section of the digitalprojectmanager.com, and you can find all kinds of conversations going on there, or just add some comments to Alexa's article and I'm sure respond. But until next time, thanks for listening.